Hello and a warm welcome from me, Freek Robinson, here on the LitNet channel. There is general consensus that next year's 7th provincial and national elections will be the most contested yet. For the first time in 30 years, there is a real possibility that the governing ANC political party might lose power. On the 30th of November, the NGO Defend Our Democracy launched its Election Watch campaign. Many other NGOs were invited to join, and many did, in fact. All of them will be registered with the IEC as observers under the umbrella of Defend Our Democracy. Their intention is to make sure the elections will be free and fair without any cheating. Our guest is Tselane, Executive Chair of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa. Previously, he was the Deputy Chair of the IEC. Welcome, Terry. Nice speaking to you. Just tell us, who gave you the mandate to actually take part in this project?
The mandate of whether the elections are free and fair is basically derived from the legislation. We have to look at the internationally accepted principles that govern the management of the elections, but the observers in general, particularly in South Africa, derive their mandate from Section 84 of the Electoral Act. That section basically gives the Electoral Commission the powers to deploy election observers. So they accredit the election observers, and after accrediting the election observers can then begin to perform their responsibilities. In the performance of that responsibilities, they've got to use internationally accepted principles of election management in order for them to be able to come to a conclusion as to whether the elections are free or not.
So they can't decide on their own, and you on your own, that you're just going to be an observer. You must register and then go through a process, isn't it?
Absolutely. All the election observers have got to adhere to certain practices. And the only way that they can actually be able to do so is by being given a permission to perform the responsibilities and to sign the code of conduct. So there's a particular practice that has got to be followed, and that practice starts with accreditation. So you can't just participate in the electoral processes as an observer without having gone through that particular arrangement.
And what must they observe, actually?
There are 5 key areas in election management that you've got to look into. Firstly, we from our side as IEMSA, or Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, have developed what we call the integrity wheel. That integrity wheel is the one that we use to measure the integrity of the elections. Integrity wheel, we developed it after we did a lot of research and after people had been asking us a question about what really constitute free and fair elections. So this integrity wheel constituted by 5 aspects, and those are the 5 aspects that we focus on when we're observing the election. The first one, it is the voters' roll. As you may be aware, voters' roll is basically a document, it's a register that determines who is eligible to participate in the electoral processes. If, for instance, you've got people who are not eligible to participate in the elections and you find their names appearing on the voters' roll, then that election cannot actually be free and fair. You may be aware that there are quite a number of areas, particularly in the continent, where the elections were nullified as a result of that. For instance, in Ghana, there is an incident where after an investigation, they found that there were people who had used national health insurance card to register, which was disallowed by the courts. And secondly, that there were people who were underage, who were not supposed to be on the voters' roll, but who appeared on the voters' roll. And on the basis of that, the court, the Superior Court in Ghana, decided to nullify the results of the elections in Ghana. Now, this is important, therefore. The voters' roll, once it has been compiled, it must contain the names of people who only qualify to participate in the election. And then those who do not qualify should not be there on the voters' roll. And then this is also
on the basis of what can you be disqualified?
On the basis of the fact that you are underage, on the basis that you are not supposed to be in that particular province, that particular area, that particular municipality, depending on the type of the elections that are taking place. You may recall here in South Africa that in Tlokwe, there was a problem where the elections were also nullified by the Constitutional Court in a matter normally referred to as the CAM and the Electoral Commission matter, where people who were staying outside the areas where by-elections were taking place had been bussed from other areas to come and register in the areas where the by-elections were taking place in order to boost the capacity of certain candidates in those areas. And then the Constitutional Court nullified that to say the people who were participating here were not supposed to have been part of these elections at all. So that's the first step. The voters' roll is critical because it determines people who are supposed to be participating in the elections. The second aspect is the logistics of the elections. You've got to make sure that the logistics are structured such that there are no people who are disadvantaged as a result of that. You can't have, for instance, a situation where ballot papers that belong to this particular area are in a different area. That will obviously disadvantage people in that area because it means, firstly, you find people who you do not know, you find the candidates that you do not know in your area. Or alternatively, if you go to a voting station and there are no ballot papers, because the logistics are such that the commission has not actually been able to prepare the logistic properly, that will also disadvantage you because then it means you cannot be able to participate in the electoral process. So all the materials that are supposed to be used for the electoral processes, they've got to be there. They've got to make sure that they are available at the time that is allocated for the elections to take place. The third
point?
Yeah, the third point is the legal framework. There needs to be a legal framework that determines how the elections are going to be run. And everybody has got to understand that framework. If you are applying the legal framework inconsistently, it means you'll be advantaging and disadvantaging other people. If I could just give an example, if in one area you could say the law says you cannot come wearing a party t-shirt, and then in another area you're allowing people to participate wearing party t-shirts, then it means you are not applying the law, or the law is not being applied consistently and fairly. That can also disadvantage a political party in an election. The fourth area is the quality of the electoral staff. The electoral staff, they've got to understand what they're doing, they've got to be trained, they've got to be able to deal with the issues in a manner that is expected of them. If some of the electoral staff are biased and they are not doing things accordingly, they will advantage, obviously, certain political parties and disadvantage others. And that election would not be free and fair. The last one is the political environment. The political environment is important because, as you may be aware, in South Africa in the past, there would be certain areas that are regarded as no-go areas. Now, if I'm campaigning and I cannot enter certain areas because I'm told that only a certain party can campaign in this area, that would also disadvantage me. So in general, when you're looking at election observation, you develop a tool based on those 5 key areas. And in those 5 key areas will then be able to tell you as to whether the electoral processes can be regarded as free and fair. So you measure the quality of the elections, the integrity of the elections, using those 5 key elements.
You will probably also train your observers to make sure that they know exactly what they are doing.
Absolutely. It's important for observers to know that once they get into the field, they know exactly what they're going to be observing. Because Otherwise, it becomes difficult for you to, as an election observation mission, to consistently receive information that would actually be able to help you to come to a determination as to whether the elections were conducted with integrity and whether the elections were free and fair. So they need to be trained, they need to understand the process, and they've got to make sure that they adhere to the principles that are there that would have developed for them.
Well, I'm sure it's going to cost a lot of money actually to get this whole operation going and maintain it even beyond the elections. So who's paying you?
Well, different organizations receive money from different sources. Some organizations, such as ours, we operate in an environment where we are charging for services that we provide, and therefore we are able to make money from the services that we are providing, because sometimes we manage the elections for various institutions, but other people also get financial resources from international organizations, but also local organizations. So it depends on an organization in terms of the performance of their responsibilities. But all in all, even if an organization receives money from whichever institution, once they operate in an election field, they've got to operate within a particular framework, and they've got to adhere to certain key principles to make sure that the process of observation is not compromised.
And then objectivity. We've seen in various African countries, for instance, in Zimbabwe, that observers say the election is not free and fair, or certainly not in certain parts, but nevertheless, then it's accepted by government, and even the South African government supporting it say, no, it was fair. So who, in final analysis, will decide?
Well, the election outcome is determined by the Electoral Commission. So in the legislation, even the observers cannot actually say to the Commission that you cannot announce the results of the election because it is in their mandate, the legal mandate, to announce the results of the elections. So when they have finalized their issues, will announce the results of an election. And after the announcement of the results of the election, then those who are disaffected by the decision of the Commission can still go to other courts to try to challenge the outcome. But the election observers, their role is that of being auditors. You audit the results, you audit the outcome, you are the ears and eyes of the Commission, you identify the weaknesses in the system, you help the Commission in order for the Commission to be able to address those issues that you identify. But you do not have the power to stop the Commission from announcing the outcome of the results of the election.
Well, I would imagine that you would probably like to see to it that each and every observer is objective as well.
All the observers, as I've suggested, they've got to operate within a code and within a particular framework and a code of conduct. They've got to make sure that they're not aligned to any political party or candidate participating in the elections. In fact, this is derived from Section 99 of the Electoral Act, where it actually says to all the observers that they cannot be part of any party or individual that is participating in the electoral processes. So that is quite critical in the electoral process, to make sure that they act impartially and that they are not compromising the whole election observation process.
I also imagine that you will have to have a good relationship with the IEC.
Yes, there is a need to have a relationship with the Electoral Commission. That's why they are the ones who accredit you. And after they've accredited you and after you have observed, you still have to come back to them and give them feedback. Even if they don't like your feedback, you have a responsibility to give them that feedback. They can't just hate you because you are giving them an objective feedback about what you have observed. It is up to them what they're going to do with the information that they're going to have. But most of the electoral commissions in the world, they take the reports of election observers very seriously. And they use those election observers to basically refine their systems and to make sure that the kind of the difficulties and challenges that they experience do not recur going forward.
Apart from those things that you've mentioned already, what is it actually what observers must do as well? For instance, report disturbances or violence or anything of that kind?
Yes, as I indicated that one of the areas is for election observers to focus on political environment. Political environment involves quite a number of things. I've spoken already about the no-go areas, but obviously if also there is violence, and that violence is impeding the capacity of individuals or the electorate to participate in the electoral process, that would obviously affect negatively the outcome of the results of an election. And therefore, the election observers must, of necessity, also look into that particular areas and check as to whether the environment within which the elections take place is conducive to free and fair elections.
And like other people, you probably also believe that this coming election is going to be one of the most important. And if so, why?
Yeah, these elections are going to be quite tough. They're going to be difficult in many respects. And then the reason why they are so important, it is firstly, it will be for the first time that the independent candidates will be participating in these elections. You may recall that in the previous elections, only political parties were participating. But the Constitutional Court has ruled that independent candidates must participate. And then day before yesterday, they reinforced this right by basically making sure that the requirements of candidates to participate are lowered. So we are likely to see more and more people participating, as independent candidates in this elections. That is very critical. But the second aspect is that if you look at the performance of the political parties over the years, you find that the days of one dominant political party are over. Now, increasingly, there is no single political party that is dominant. This you can see in all the metros where the governance is through coalition arrangement. Now, that is a clear indication that things are changing in the country. And there are many people who believe that they can actually be able to make a difference by participating, that even if you've got only one seat, you can actually make a difference with that one seat that you will be occupying, because other parties may require that one seat in order to be able to govern. So this makes these elections even more important.
Then we can go back to the Constitutional Court. They have decided in the favor, and in a sense also not in favor, of the Candidates Association and the proposals that they've put forward. So if you could just explain that briefly, what exactly does the ruling of the Constitutional Court mean?
Well, the ruling is divided into the following. The first aspect is that the challenge was whether the 200-200 split in Parliament, it's actually constitutional or unconstitutional. And the 200-200 split basically refers to the fact that the Constitution determines that the members of National Assembly should not be more than 400. Now, in terms of the legislation, the Electoral Amendment Act, the Minister and Parliament have decided that only 200 seats will be contested by independent candidates, and the remaining 200 seats would be contested only by the political parties. The independent candidates wanted the arrangement to be 350 seats to be contested by independent candidates, and 50 seats being reserved for political parties. But the Constitutional Court, using the Atkins report, found that in the area of 200 to 200, the risk of what they call overhang or excessive seats, it's very less. unlike in the case of 350 to 50 split. What is this overhang? And then what does it mean, the excessive seats and the overhang and this risk? Basically, as I've indicated, the National Assembly has got 400 seats. And in order for you to be able to get into parliament, there is a particular formula that is being used to get a seat in parliament. Now, if a political party, if now using that formula that has been designed, you find that you use the system of 200 and 200 or 350 to 50 a split. And then you find that there are more people elected than the number of seats available in the National Assembly. So you end up, for instance, with people who qualify being 402, when actually the Constitution says you must have 400. What are you going to be doing with the remaining 2 people who qualify, who have qualified to come in? So this overhang, apparently it is much more, it can be experienced much more in a situation where the split is between 350 seats to 50 seats. And therefore, the Constitutional Court felt that the decision by Parliament to create a 200 splits for political parties and independents and the 200 for political parties is rational, and that the Parliament did the right thing. The second aspect dealt with the issue of the quota that is required for a political party, for a candidate to qualify to participate in the elections. The Parliament had decided that 15% of what it would have required to get a seat in the previous elections would be what is required for a candidate to get the number of the signatures. So the number of the signatures, if you take that 15% and then you divide it according to the number of what it would have required to get a seat in Parliament in the previous elections, it basically was requiring an independent candidate to have between 10,000 and 17,000 signatures of registered voters in order for them to be able to participate in the elections. Now the Constitutional Court decided, instead of having this onerous process of getting this kind of requirements from the independent candidates who don't even have the resources, they reduced this from 10,000 to about 1,000, which gives them at least a room to maneuver in order to be able to participate in the electoral processes. The requirements are no longer as onerous as before.
Just explain to us exactly what can the voter expect when he receives or she receives the voter's letter, where you must actually make your cross. What physically is going to be the situation there?
When a voter gets to the voting station, the voter will be provided with 2 ballot papers for national elections. Those 2 ballot papers will be one for a ballot paper that contains independent candidates, as well as candidates who are supported by political parties. They are still regarded as constituency or independent candidates, but they will have the logo of a political party because they are supported by political parties. Others will have no logo of any political party because they are contesting on their own. So that is one ballot paper that they will receive. And the second ballot paper is what we call proportional representation ballot paper. That ballot paper will only contain the names of political parties that will be contesting the national elections. So that's the difference. In the past, one would only get one ballot paper for national elections, which is proportional representation for all the political parties. This time around, it is that one, as well as the one where you will have the names of independent candidates participating in the elections.
Do you think it's possible that South Africa might have an independent candidate as the president of the country?
I think it's a bit unlikely. And the reason why it is unlikely, it is because the political parties will have more candidates. They will have more members in parliament than a independent candidate. Independent candidate can only occupy one seat. And in Section 86 of the Constitution determines that once members get to the National Assembly at its first sitting, they will from amongst themselves elect a man or a woman who will become the president. Now, because the political parties will have the majority, I think it gives them an advantage over an independent candidate. However, depending on the balance of forces, it is still possible that we can have what you're having in Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, where a minority or a person who came with only one vote or one seat can still be elected by the majority of the political parties because they are unable to agree on the formation of a government or on placing a candidate from amongst their ranks. But because we don't have a direct system of electing the president has got to be elected from amongst members of the National Assembly who will be gathering there. It gives political parties a lot more advantage than independent candidates in relation to the appointment of the president.
Once you've made a decision on the fairness of the election and you bring out a report and you are critical in some areas, what is going to happen in practice? Who is going to enforce what you suggest or take it seriously?
The legislative changes is obviously the preserve of Parliament. Now, once the Commission accepts some of the things that we have, they will draft regulations, they will draft amendments if it requires amendments. But the Commission is the one that will implement the recommendations that are coming from the election observers. If they find that there are certain aspects in law that are a hindrance to participation of individuals in the elections, then they will make such a point, and the Commission will then look at that and see as to whether there's possibility of an amendment of the framework that is there, that is governing the process.
And then also, who is somebody going to watch you to make sure that you are fair in what you're doing?
The election observers are like auditors, as I've said. So auditors don't have auditors auditing them. They are regarded as objective based on the key principles that they are using for the purpose of auditing the process that they are auditing. And then therefore the election observers as well, once they have outlined the methodology that they are using for the election observation, once they have outlined all the processes that they have followed, just like the auditors, they will then be able to present their report, and it is that report that speaks to their work.
Well, you have a massive campaign going that is also new and different from other elections. Are you confident and up to it to actually deliver a fair report and to do so speedily and effectively?
Absolutely. We believe that with the experience that the majority of us have in terms of election management, that it is going to be possible to be able to set up systems for election observation, train the staff and people who are going to be deployed at the local level and receive information on time in order to be able to announce the results of the outcome even before the announcement of the results of the elections. Because it is important that report is given to the Commission as a preliminary statement, and then the full report normally comes after the elections.
Jerry Tselane, thank you very much. Thanks for taking part in our program. All of the best.
Thank you very much for having me.